Advancement Project is a legal action organization that came into the stimulus world because we realized that the large amounts of funding, government funding that were coming down really presented an opportunity, and that if this money was used right, not only would it create jobs, but it would improve neighborhoods for the communities that were most impacted by the recession. So what we have been doing over the past several months is really trying to track the money. Where is the money going? How is it being used? And how is it playing out in communities of color? Not just in terms of jobs, but also in terms of the projects that are being funded. Are those projects in communities of color? Are communities of color receiving education funds? Are they able to get roads, et cetera, and improvements to their community? And of course, I have to say that this has been a very difficult task to do, and that while the transparency is probably better than we have seen in any other federal spending program, we still have difficulties tracking the money. So when we think about the stimulus funding, and in particular with communities of color, we know that the unemployment rates in January of this year were whites 8.7%, African Americans 6.5%, and Latinos 12.6%. We know that these communities have been hardest hit by the foreclosures, by every other measure with regard to why we are in a recession. So as I said, we thought this was an opportunity to undo not only the current inequities, but the past inequities. And so how do we know whether or not this is happening is the question. Clearly, we are having problems because with regard to jobs, there is no data that is collected that shows the race or gender or ethnicity of those who are getting the jobs or those who are keeping their jobs. With regard to minority contracting data, we are able to get some data because the federal government for direct federal contracts actually does keep that data. And that data, out of the $39 billion in direct federal contracts that went to small businesses, the Kirwan Institute actually looked at this and showed that only 77.6% were going to businesses owned by women, 3.5% to Hispanic-owned business, and 2.5% to Black-owned businesses. We actually, for the first year anniversary, tried to figure out, well, what data is there at the macro level that we could look at and say, you know, it's working or it's not working. And so at the 1 year anniversary, we decided to look at the data on recovery.gov and found that there really was this quite interesting index called the diversity index. And we wanted to see, well, this is great. They're providing some race information. Perhaps it's going to show that the money is being used to target those communities most impacted, i.e. communities of color. So what we did was that we looked at this diversity index, and I'm going to show you a slide. And we looked at the diversity index, which actually shows the racial and ethnic diversity of each state and puts them on a scale of 0 to 100. A rank of 100 means that if you pick two random people in a state, there's a 100% chance that they would be of different races or ethnicity. California has the greatest diversity with a score of 83. Vermont has the lowest with a score of 8. We wanted to see whether or not there's a statistically significant relationship between the state's diversity index and the amount of recovery funding that has gone to that state. We hoped to see a positive relationship, meaning that where there are more people of color, there's more money going. But instead, we found that there was an inverse relationship. States with greater diversity receive less recovery funding per state resident. For example, when you look at the state of California, which is the first column, and it's actually the first because it has the highest diversity, California with the highest diversity score of 83 did receive the most recovery funding, but it has 37 million residents, making it $586 per resident. So this blue bar is the actual diversity score, and then the dot is actually the amount of money that they receive per resident. So they receive $586 per resident versus the US average of $724 per resident. The lowest is Florida, which has a diversity index of 61, and the lowest recovery rate spending per resident of $491. We also compare, and I'm going to go to the next slide, we also wanted to see where the money is going versus state unemployment. Hey, this makes sense that perhaps the money is going to where the highest unemployment rates are. Well, lo and behold, unfortunately, that's not the way the funding is working out. So we found that states with higher unemployment rates received less recovery funding. For every 1% increase in unemployment, there is a decrease in recovery funds of $28.48 per state resident. For example, Oklahoma, with a 6.2% unemployment rate, received $632 per resident, state resident, but Florida, with a 10.4% unemployment rate, received only $491. So we can talk more in the questions period about kind of some of the fixes to this, but one of the things that we're looking to do at Advancement Project is, as we're tracking where the money's going, not only for the jobs part is just very difficult in terms of whether or not people of color are getting jobs. I shouldn't say difficult, it's impossible. But with regard to the project funding, figuring out whether or not communities of color are being redlined with regard to recovery funding. And in fact, one of the things that we know at Advancement Project as lawyers is that there are some civil rights hooks to making sure that funding is going to the communities that are most impacted, and there are other laws that apply also.